The morning light always came late to the courthouse, filtered through narrow, dust-coated windows that turned it pale and weary before it ever touched the floor. Long before that light appeared, Jeb Walker was already there, his mop sliding across the marble like a tired waltz partner. The sound of the bristles whispered through the halls, soft, rhythmic, a hymn no one listened to. The building smelled of polish and old paper, of ambition gone stale. Every step Jeb took seemed to echo against memories that weren't his. Judges shouting verdicts, lawyers celebrating, defendants breaking down. He'd seen it all in silence, the invisible man among the powerful. He was 63, thin as the handle of his broom, his back slightly bent from years of lifting, bending, and pretending not to hear. His uniform, a faded navy jumpsuit, bore the stitched name Walker J. But most people didn't bother to read it. They called him the janitor, or old man, or sometimes just hey. It didn't bother him. Not anymore. Once, long ago, he'd had a name that mattered. James Edward Walker, husband, father, foreman at a steel plant in Richmond. But time and bad luck had stripped those titles away. One foreclosure, one hospital bill, one mistake at a time. What remained was this: a man, a mop, and a key to every room justice pretended to live in. The courthouse at dawn was peaceful in a way that soothed him. The hum of the vending machines, the groan of old pipes, the slow-breathing silence before the day's chaos began. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every flicker in the fluorescent lights, every judge's preferred brand of coffee. He even knew who slept with who drank too much after hours, and which defense attorney stole pens from evidence storage. No one ever noticed the janitor, which made him the perfect witness. He wasn't nosy by nature. Years of humiliation had taught him that curiosity could look like defiance to people with power. But sometimes curiosity wasn't a choice. Sometimes it came disguised as conscience. And conscience was something Jeb couldn't mop away, no matter how hard he scrubbed. That morning, the courthouse would host the closing arguments for the state versus Miguel Ramos, a murder trial that had become the talk of Franklin County. The victim was a convenience store clerk, shot during a robbery. The accused was a 22-year-old mechanic's apprentice from the wrong side of town. Jeb had seen Miguel once, in the hallway after a hearing. The boy sat in handcuffs, eyes dark with confusion and fear. He looked nothing like a killer, more like a kid who had stumbled into a nightmare too big to wake from. Jeb's gut had whispered something then, the way it sometimes did. This ain't right. He didn't know what had drawn him into that case. Maybe it was the way the prosecutor, Leonard Hall, smiled. Too slick, too sure. Or maybe it was the way Sarah Klein, the defense attorney, kept fighting even when she looked ready to collapse. There was something desperate about her that reminded Jeb of his daughter before she left for good. The same clenched jaw, the same stubborn hope that the world could still be fair. By 7:30, the courthouse was stirring. The bailiff stomped in with his coffee, the clerks arrived in their heels and chatter, and the day began its slow march toward judgment. Jeb kept cleaning. He always did his best work when people were too busy to notice him. At 9 sharp, Hall passed through the hallway, barking at an assistant about tying up the final details. His voice bounced against the marble. Jeb, down on one knee polishing the brass rail, caught every word. The defense has nothing, Hall was saying. No weapon, no prints, no alibi that sticks. The video's gone, and I made damn sure it stays gone. The assistant chuckled. So we're good? We're golden. By tomorrow, that kid'll be doing life, and we'll be back to the golf course. They disappeared into the elevator, leaving the faint scent of expensive cologne and moral decay. Jeb's hand froze on the rag. He felt the air thicken. The video's gone. He knew what that meant. Hall had buried evidence. He'd heard whispers like that before, but never this clear, never this bold. His heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something older, deeper. A rage he hadn't felt since the night the plant shut down and his crew lost everything. He remembered standing in front of men who'd worked 30 years, watching the executives walk away clean. The same kind of men who thought consequences were for other people. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his uniform. The air in the hallway tasted of disinfectant and betrayal. That night, after the courthouse emptied, Jeb stayed behind. He told the guard he was finishing a floor job, then disappeared into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement, the one marked Records and Evidence Storage. The door slid open to darkness. The basement smelled of mildew and secrets. Metal shelves lined the concrete walls, packed with boxes labeled in fading ink. Decades of trials, each box a forgotten story. Jeb switched on his flashlight and began reading the labels. Brown, 2012. Ellis, 2016. Harper, 2018. Then his beam landed on one marked Ramos, Evidence C, Box 43. The number hit him like a whisper remembered from a dream. He dropped to one knee, pried it open, and stared at the contents. Blood-stained clothing, a gun casing, some paperwork, and a small black external hard drive sealed in plastic. The sticker on it read, Surveillance Footage. Gas station camera 4B. His breath caught. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew what this meant. The gas station was where Miguel claimed he'd been when the murder happened. If the footage proved it, the kid was innocent. And Hall had hidden it. He wanted to grab the drive and run straight to the police. But who would believe a janitor? Who would even listen? He turned the drive over in his hands, feeling its weight. Small, almost nothing, yet heavier than every mop bucket he'd ever carried. He thought of Miguel's mother in the hallway, whispering prayers to a God who didn't seem to be listening. He thought of Sarah Klein, standing in front of 12 strangers begging them to see reason. And then he thought of his own daughter, somewhere out there, still angry at him for losing everything. Jeb slid the drive behind a vent cover near the basement door. He'd find a way. He didn't know how, but he would. When he returned upstairs, the janitor's closet felt colder than usual. He sat on his stool, elbows on his knees, staring at the mop leaning against the wall. "You done a lot of cleaning, Jeb," he muttered to himself. "Maybe it's time you clean something that matters." The next morning, the courthouse was buzzing with reporters. The verdict was scheduled for that afternoon. Jeb worked in silence, watching as Hall strutted down the hallway like a peacock, all smiles and swagger. Sarah Klein passed a moment later, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She didn't notice him standing by the vending machine. Nobody ever did. But as she walked by, Jeb whispered softly, almost to himself, "Hold on, kid." He didn't know if she heard him. Maybe she didn't have to. As the clock in the lobby struck 11, Jeb pushed his cart toward courtroom 3, mop handle clicking against the tiles. The room was filling fast. Journalists setting up cameras, jurors taking their seats, the judge adjusting his robe. The air was electric, the kind of charged silence that comes before thunder. Jeb took his spot in the corner by the back door, where he always stood. From there, he could see everything. Hall's grin, Sarah's clenched fists, Miguel's trembling shoulders. The judge lifted his gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this court is now in session." Jeb's fingers brushed the folded piece of paper in his pocket, a note he had written the night before in his shaky handwriting. Evidence hidden in basement storage, box 43J. He knew what he was about to do could cost him everything, his job, his pension, maybe even his freedom. But the thought of walking out of that courthouse, knowing an innocent man would spend his life in a cell, that was a kind of prison too. He watched as the prosecutor rose to deliver his final statement. Hall's voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false conviction. "The people of Franklin County deserve justice, and today they will have it." Jeb's jaw tightened. Justice. He'd heard that word so many times it had lost all meaning. As Hall spoke, Jeb crouched down, pretending to pick up a candy wrapper near the defense table. The movement was small, practiced. When Sarah bent to gather her papers, he let the folded note slip from his hand into the open flap of her briefcase. Then he stood, straightened his back, and resumed mopping. The gavel struck again. Court will now hear final remarks before verdict. Sarah glanced down, frowning as she noticed the note. Her eyes scanned it quickly, confusion flickering into disbelief. She looked around the room. For the first time, she saw him, the janitor. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink, just met her gaze with a calm that said, "Trust me." She turned back to the judge, her voice trembling. "Your Honor," she said, "before this court renders its decision, I request an immediate recess. New evidence has come to my attention that may exonerate my client." The room erupted. Reporters whispered. Hall's face blanched. The judge raised his eyebrows. "On what grounds?" Sarah held up the note. "On the grounds of truth." And just like that, the tide began to turn. The story of the Janitor of Justice was only beginning, and Jeb Walker, the man no one saw, was about to change everything. The hallway outside the courtroom pulsed with noise, the rustle of papers, the clicking of cameras, the buzz of speculation spreading like wildfire through the marble veins of the courthouse. Reporters whispered in disbelief, jurors exchanged nervous glances, and Leonard Hall stood at the prosecution's table, his knuckles white around the pen he was gripping. Sarah Klein's heart hammered in her chest as she folded the note again, her mind spinning faster than her breathing could keep up. The letters were shaky, scrawled in the kind of hand that belonged to an older man. There was no name, only an initial. J, basement storage, box 43. It didn't make sense. Who would risk slipping something like this to her, here, now, in the middle of the verdict? Yet something about the handwriting, the blunt honesty of it, pulled at her instinct. She'd been a defense lawyer long enough to know when a hunch was worth following. And this one, it felt like it was pulsing with truth. The judge, clearly unsettled, rubbed at his temple. "Ms. Klein, you are aware this is highly irregular?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach was a storm. "But justice doesn't keep office hours. If there's even a chance that evidence has been withheld, we owe it to the truth to find out." Hall slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. She's grasping at shadows, Your Honor. We've been through discovery, through every—" "Enough, Mr. Hall." The judge's tone cut through the noise like a blade. He turned to Sarah again, his gray eyes unreadable. "You have 30 minutes. If nothing comes of this, we proceed immediately with the verdict. Am I clear?" Sarah nodded once, the note clutched tightly in her palm. When the gavel came down, the sound felt heavier than ever, like the heartbeat of fate itself. The basement door groaned open on its hinges. The air inside was cold and damp, thick with the scent of rust and time. Sarah descended the narrow concrete stairs, her heels echoing like metronomes of dread. Every step deeper felt like crossing some invisible line between law and faith. Behind her, Officer Reed followed, a heavy-set bailiff with a flashlight and a skeptical frown. "You sure about this, ma'am? Basement's been locked up for weeks. Only maintenance comes down here." "I'm sure," Sarah said, though she wasn't. The beam of Reed's flashlight sliced through the darkness, catching dust motes suspended like ghosts. Boxes stretched from floor to ceiling, stacked in endless rows, each labeled in black marker. Smith, 2014. Brown, 2017. Miller, 2019. It felt like walking into the graveyard of forgotten truths. Her eyes searched for the numbers. 39, 40, 41. "Here," she whispered. Box 43. It sat on the lower shelf, half buried under folders and a stray broom handle, its cardboard edges softened by years. The label read, "Ramos, Exhibit C." Sarah's breath caught. She reached out, but Hall's voice echoed suddenly behind her. "Well, isn't this something?" Sarah turned sharply. Hall stood in the doorway, his expensive suit a shadow among shadows. He had moved fast, too fast. His face was calm, but his eyes were knives. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He smiled, slow and sharp. "Neither should you." Reed stepped forward. "Mr. Hall, Judge gave her 30 minutes to—" "Oh, I'm aware," Hall cut in. "But it seems our dear Ms. Klein doesn't understand how evidence works. These boxes are sealed for a reason." He moved closer, his polished shoes scraping against the floor. "You're making a career-ending mistake." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'll take that risk." Then she tore the tape open. Inside, beneath a stack of dusty folders and a faded photo of the crime scene, was a clear plastic evidence bag. And inside that, a small black external hard drive. The label had nearly peeled away, but the words were still legible. "Surveillance, gas station, camera 4B. Reed whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Hall's calm cracked. "That's inadmissible," he snapped. "No chain of custody." Sarah's voice cut him off, firm and low. "Because you broke it." They stared at each other for a long, tense second, the corrupt power against the desperate truth. Then she turned to Reed. "We're taking this upstairs. Now." Hall moved to block the way. "You don't know what you're doing. Get out of my way." Something dark flickered in his expression, the kind of arrogance that comes from a lifetime of winning. But Reed was already stepping forward, broad shoulders squared. "Sir, I'd suggest you move before I call the judge myself." Hall hesitated, then smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Fine, but remember, Klein, if you open that drive, you open Pandora's box, and what comes out won't just burn me." Sarah said nothing. She just pushed past him, clutching the hard drive like it was the last heartbeat of a dying truth. Upstairs, the courtroom had turned into a battlefield of murmurs. The jury sat restless. Reporters leaned forward in anticipation. Even the judge's expression had softened from irritation to curiosity. Sarah placed the hard drive on the evidence table with both hands. "Your Honor, we found this in the basement storage, Box 43. It appears to contain surveillance footage that was never disclosed to the defense." Hall stood rigid beside her, the tendons in his jaw tightening. "Objection! This is outrageous. There's no proof this wasn't planted. No record of—" The judge's gavel struck once. "Enough, Mr. Hall. We'll let the evidence speak for itself." An IT technician was summoned. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the drive was connected to a monitor. The file directory appeared. One folder, dated the night of the murder. Sarah's breath hitched. The video flickered to life. Grainy but clear. A gas station security camera. A digital timestamp glowed in the corner. A car pulled up to the pump. Inside, the driver's face turned toward the lens for just a second. It was Miguel Ramos. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m., the exact time the victim was shot, 2 miles away. Gasps rippled through the room like a physical wind. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors exchanged shocked looks. Sarah felt her knees go weak. Hall tried to speak, some desperate objection forming on his lips, but the judge cut him down with a stare that could melt iron. "Mr. Hall, do you care to explain why this footage was not entered into discovery?" Hall's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in his career, words abandoned him. The judge leaned back slowly, steepling his fingers. "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hall out of this courtroom. We'll discuss his contempt charges after recess." Reed moved toward Hall, gripping his arm firmly. Hall didn't resist, just smiled faintly at Sarah, a ghost of his old confidence flickering. "You think you won, don't you? Truth's messy, Miss Klein. It never stays clean for long." But Sarah wasn't listening. She turned toward Miguel, who sat frozen in disbelief, tears gathering in his eyes. "You're going home," she whispered. The gavel struck one final time. "Case dismissed. The defendant is free." The sound of applause burst like thunder from the spectators' gallery. Reporters shouting questions, Miguel's mother sobbing into her hands, Sarah collapsing back into her chair as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. But through the chaos, she looked toward the back of the courtroom, to the corner where the janitor always stood. Jeb Walker was gone. Only his mop leaned against the wall, silent and still, like a relic left behind after some invisible battle. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft, cleansing, relentless. Sarah stepped into it, her coat clinging to her shoulders, her hair already damp. She felt lighter, yet strangely hollow. Victory had come too suddenly, too perfectly, and her mind still echoed with Hall's last words. Truth never stays clean for long. She turned the small note over in her hand, now smudged from her grip. Basement storage. Box 43. Jay. Who was Jay? The janitor, maybe? She remembered a flash of grey hair, tired eyes, the smell of cleaning chemicals as he'd passed her in the hallway a dozen times. She'd never spoken to him, not once. She had never even learned his name, but now the image wouldn't leave her. Somewhere inside the courthouse, that man had known what others refused to see. He had risked his job, maybe his life, to tip the scales of justice back to where they belonged. And yet, he'd disappeared as quietly as he'd come. Sarah exhaled, long and shaky, as she walked down the courthouse steps. The world looked different in the rain, cleaner, but also more fragile. She didn't know it yet, but that night she would dream of hallways echoing with footsteps, of a man with a mop standing guard beside the doors of justice. And when she woke, the mystery of Jeb Walker would refuse to leave her alone. The courthouse was quieter now. The frenzy of the trial had dissolved into a memory of footsteps and whispers, as if the building itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The marble floors gleamed under the dim security lights, and somewhere deep in the belly of that structure, Jeb Walker was sweeping. The mop glided in slow circles, each stroke deliberate, almost meditative. The faint hum of the fluorescent bulbs above him filled the silence, but it was a silence Jeb had learned to live with long ago. He knew by morning the newspapers would scream headlines about the trial, about the miraculous discovery of hidden evidence, about the fall of Leonard Hall, about the boy who walked free. But none of those stories would mention the old man who had made it possible. That was fine by him. Fame, attention, they were for people who needed validation. Jeb had long since stopped needing that. Still, as he wrung out the mop, he felt something strange pressing against his ribs, something warm and heavy like pride mixed with fear. He wasn't sure which one outweighed the other. From the far end of the hall came the squeak of a shoe. Jeb turned instinctively, his muscles tightening. A man stood in the shadows near the stairwell, tall, built like a linebacker in an expensive suit. The faint gleam of a gold cufflink caught the light. "You're working late, Mr. Walker," the man said, his voice too casual, too smooth. Jeb kept his eyes on the floor. "Place doesn't clean itself." The man stepped closer. "You were in the courtroom today." Jeb wrung the mop again, water splashing into the bucket. "I'm in there every day." "Funny," the man said. "So's my boss, or was, until an hour ago." Now Jeb looked up. The man's expression was polite, but his eyes were the kind that didn't blink unless they wanted to make a point. "Mr. Hall doesn't like being embarrassed," the man continued, "and from what I hear, someone helped that lawyer find something that should have stayed buried." Jeb didn't flinch. He'd been stared down by worse men, foremen, cops, landlords. They all had the same look, the certainty of power. "You got something you want me to say?" The man's smile tightened. "Just making conversation." He stepped even closer, until Jeb could smell his cologne, expensive, sharp, the kind of scent that lingered in a room after bad news. "Because if it was you've made a dangerous kind of friend in the truth, and she doesn't protect people like you for long." For a second, neither of them spoke. The hum of the lights grew louder, Then Jeb leaned on his mop, his voice low and steady. "Son, I've been cleaning this courthouse 15 years. I've heard men swear on God and lie in the same breath. You think truth's new to me?" The man's smile faded. "Just remember what I said." He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the stairwell. When the door closed, Jeb exhaled slowly. His hand shook slightly as he gripped the mop handle. He didn't scare easily, but he wasn't stupid either. He'd seen enough to know threats weren't made for fun. Hall still had friends, powerful ones, and they wouldn't take kindly to being exposed. He went back to cleaning, but his mind was no longer in the motion of it. He kept replaying the look in that man's eyes, the promise of something inevitable. By the time he finished, the eastern sky was paling, and his reflection in the window looked older than ever. Sarah Klein couldn't sleep. She'd tried, 3 hours of tossing under rumpled sheets, replaying the day over and over until the memories blurred together. The trial, the video, the note, the way the janitor had disappeared before she could thank him. She sat at her kitchen table now, laptop open, the light from the screen painting her face pale blue. Articles flooded her feed. Miracle in Franklin County, evidence discovered hours before verdict. Prosecutor under investigation for suppressing key footage. And one headline that made her pause. Unknown source may have tipped defense. She scrolled down, heart thudding. The piece speculated that an internal whistleblower had alerted the defense about the missing evidence. Some claimed it was a junior clerk. Others hinted at a bailiff. No one mentioned a janitor. Sarah closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. The image of him wouldn't leave her mind. That quiet old man standing by the courtroom wall, his uniform faded, his eyes tired but alert. She'd seen enough people in her life to know when someone carried truth like a burden. Whoever he was, he hadn't just helped her, he'd saved a life. And something about that didn't feel finished. By the next morning, she was back at the courthouse. The place felt different now, warmer, almost reverent, like the air after a storm. Reporters still lingered near the steps, but inside, everything was routine again. She found the head clerk, a middle-aged woman named Janice, and asked, "The janitor who works the main hallways, do you know his name?" Janice frowned. "Walker, I think. Jeb Walker. Why?" "I need to thank him," Sarah said. Janice's expression softened. "Good luck catching him. He's like a ghost, always around, but never where you expect. Old school type. Doesn't talk much." Sarah nodded, but she didn't give up. She checked every hallway, every closet, even the basement where she'd found the evidence. Empty. It wasn't until she reached the west wing, near the records room, that she heard it. The soft rhythm of a mop against tile. He was there, just as she remembered, back slightly bent, moving with patient precision. "Mr. Walker," she called gently. He looked up, startled at first, then wary. "Miss Klein, you shouldn't be down here. I came to thank you." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "For what?" "For doing what no one else would. You saved that boy's life." He shook his head. "Didn't save nobody. I just pointed at the dirt. You did the cleaning." "I don't believe that." Jeb leaned on his mop, meeting her eyes. "Truth's a dangerous thing, Miss Klein. You dig it up, somebody's bound to get buried under it. You sure you want to thank me for that?" She hesitated. "If doing what's right makes enemies, then maybe that's the price." He chuckled softly. "That's a fine thing to say when you've still got a job and a nameplate on your desk." Sarah stepped closer. "Mr. Walker, what you did, it mattered. People will talk about this case for years." "That's exactly what I don't want," he said, his tone suddenly sharp. "The less they talk, the better, for both of us." She frowned. "Are you in danger?" Jeb didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the narrow window at the end of the hallway. Outside, the morning sun had begun to rise, spilling light through the glass like liquid gold. He thought of the man in the suit, the warning, the way it had slithered under his skin. "Danger's part of the job. he said finally. "You'd be surprised what kind of filth sticks to this place after dark." There was something in his voice that chilled her, a kind of weary knowledge that only comes from seeing too much. She wanted to press him, to ask who had threatened him, but before she could speak, footsteps echoed from down the hall. Jeb's head snapped up, and in that instant his expression changed, alert, guarded. A man in uniform turned the corner, another janitor, younger, carrying a trash bag. "Hey, Jeb," the man said casually. "Supervisor wants to see you upstairs." Jeb nodded slowly. "Yeah, be right there." The man left, but Sarah caught the tension in Jeb's shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the mop just a little too tight. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "if you ever need anything, protection, representation, call me, please." She scribbled her number on a sticky note and handed it to him. He stared at it for a long second before sliding it into his pocket. "Appreciate it, ma'am, but people like me, we don't get protected, we just keep cleaning." When she left, Jeb stood alone for a long while, the sound of the other janitor's footsteps fading upstairs. He waited until the hallway was empty before taking the note back out. The handwriting was neat, decisive. He folded it once, then twice, and tucked it into the lining of his jumpsuit. For the first time in years, someone had seen him, not the janitor, not the shadow, but the man behind it. He should have felt comforted. Instead, he felt exposed. That night, the rain returned. The courthouse lights reflected in the puddles like stars trapped on the ground. Jeb locked up his cart, checked the storage closets, and made his usual rounds. Everything seemed normal, yet every sound felt louder than it should. Each echo, each flicker of light stretching longer than time allowed. As he passed the elevator, he heard voices, low, urgent. He slowed. "Told you he's got to be dealt with," one voice said. "Paul's not going down alone."
"You sure it's him?" another asked. "Positive. Old janitor. Name's Walker." Jeb froze. His pulse roared in his ears. "Make it look like an accident," the first voice said. "Slip, fall, whatever. The old man's invisible anyway. Nobody'll ask questions." The elevator dinged, and the voices vanished. Jeb leaned against the wall, eyes shut, breathing through the panic that rose like acid in his throat. He'd known the danger was real, but hearing it out loud, it made everything solid, final. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors, held mops, folded evidence notes. They were shaking. He wasn't scared for himself anymore. He'd lived enough years to know death wasn't the worst thing that could happen. What terrified him was that truth might die with him. He straightened slowly, wiping his palms on his jumpsuit. His reflection in the metal elevator door stared back, tired, old, but still standing. "All right, Jeb," he whispered. "One last mess to clean." He turned, heading toward the records room. If they wanted him gone, he'd make sure the truth stayed alive first. He had a plan. Risky, maybe impossible, but it was all he had left. Outside on the courthouse steps, Sarah's car sat idling in the rain. She'd been sitting there for 10 minutes, staring at the building. Something about Jeb's tone that morning had gnawed at her all day. The way he said danger's part of the job. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over his number. Then she hesitated. She didn't want to invade his privacy. But something deeper, a lawyer's instinct, or maybe just a human one, kept whispering that this wasn't over. Finally, she turned off the ignition and stepped out into the rain. The courthouse doors were locked, the halls dark. But as she circled around the side, a faint light glowed through the basement window, flickering, irregular, like a candle in a storm. Sarah's pulse quickened. Inside that basement, Jeb Walker was opening a folder he'd hidden long before the trial ever began. Notes, transcripts, copied files. He'd seen corruption grow in that courthouse for years.
Hall wasn't the first, wouldn't be the last. But now he had proof. Proof of more than one buried case. Proof of a system rotting from the inside out. He didn't hear the footsteps above him. He didn't see the shadow moving down the stairwell. But the air had changed. He could feel it. And in that moment, as the rain outside turned from drizzle to downpour, Jeb knew he wasn't going to make it out of that basement the same way he'd come in. Rain clawed at the windows like desperate fingers. The storm had deepened, drenching Franklin County in sheets of cold water that blurred streetlights into trembling halos. The courthouse stood against it like an aging giant, solemn, silent, and hollow, its heart still pulsing with secrets. Inside the basement, Jeb Walker moved like a ghost through dim corridors. The overhead lights flickered, painting the walls in intermittent flashes of white and shadow. He had spread out his old folders across a maintenance table, names, trial dates, bits of copied transcripts he'd collected over the years. They weren't souvenirs, they were warnings. He had always known that the system he cleaned every night was dirtier than any floor he mopped. He'd seen files vanish, evidence misplaced, judges whispering in private chambers. He told himself it wasn't his business. He needed the paycheck, needed the silence to survive. But then came the Ramos case, and something had shifted. For the first time in years, he'd done something that made him feel alive. Now that same choice was going to kill him. He picked up one of the files. State v. McCree, 2018. The name on the prosecution line, Leonard Hall. The victim had been a teenage boy. The defendant, a black man from the East Side, convicted on circumstantial evidence. Jeb's jaw tightened. He'd cleaned the courtroom that day. He remembered Hall shaking hands with the judge afterward, both of them smiling. That boy had gotten life without parole. He traced his finger down the page, whispering to himself, "You're not gonna die for nothing, son. I'll make 'em see it." He stuffed the folders into an old maintenance bag, zipping it up with trembling fingers. He'd go to Sarah Klein in the morning. She was smart, unbought. She'd know what to do. But first, he needed to survive the night. He heard it then, the faint creak of a door upstairs. The sound carried down through the vents like a whisper. Jeb froze, listening. Another sound followed. Footsteps, slow, heavy, not the kind of walk that belonged to a janitor or a guard. He turned off the light. The darkness swallowed him whole. Only the faint green glow of the emergency exit sign remained. The footsteps grew closer. He moved silently toward the far end of the basement where the old generator room connected to a back stairwell. His breath came shallow, his boots making no sound on the damp concrete. Every instinct told him not to look back, but he did. A silhouette moved past the glass panel in the door. A large man, umbrella dripping rainwater onto the floor, flashlight in hand. The beam swept across the walls, landing briefly on the maintenance table. "Walker!" the man's voice called out, calm, casual, but carrying the kind of menace that didn't need volume. "You down here?" Jeb didn't answer. The flashlight beam moved again. "I just want to talk." Jeb's hand brushed against a wrench on the shelf beside him. He gripped it tight. His mind raced, not with fear, but with grim acceptance. They'd come faster than he expected. He took a step backward, then another, until his back hit the cold metal door of the stairwell. The handle wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. He cursed under his breath. The flashlight beam found him. "There you are," the man said softly. Jeb ducked as the beam flared across his face and swung the wrench, hitting the light with a crash. The basement plunged into darkness again. For a few seconds, silence. Then the sound of footsteps, faster now. Jeb bolted toward the left corridor, bag slung over his shoulder. The air smelled of rust and ozone. Behind him came the echo of pursuit, boots hitting concrete, the creak of doors flung open. He knew every inch of this place. He'd cleaned it for years, memorized every vent, every corner, every hidden maintenance hatch. He cut down a side passage, ducked behind a stack of old paint cans, and waited. The footsteps stopped. Then the man's voice again, closer this time. "You think anyone's gonna believe a janitor over a prosecutor?" A pause. "You should have stayed quiet, old man." Jeb pressed his palm against his chest. His heart felt like it was trying to escape. He waited until the footsteps moved farther away, then slipped through the maintenance hatch and into the duct system. It was narrow, suffocating, but it led toward the boiler room, his only exit. The air was hot and metallic. He crawled on his elbows, dragging the bag behind him, each scrape of metal against metal, echoing like thunder in his skull. He emerged through a grate behind the boiler. The storm outside was louder now. He could hear thunder crack like gunfire above the roof. He needed to get to the west exit, grab his truck, and disappear until morning. Then he'd find Sarah. Then he'd tell her everything. But as he pushed open the basement door, a hand grabbed him from the shadows and slammed him against the wall. The bag spilled open, papers scattering like startled birds. The man from before loomed over him, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes were calm, almost pitying. "You should have known better, Walker." Jeb's voice was hoarse. "You don't get to bury truth forever." The man sighed, almost genuinely. "You really believe that?" "Yeah," Jeb said, his lips trembling. "Because I already passed it on." For the first time, the man hesitated. "What?" Jeb smiled faintly through blood on his lip. "You're too late." The man's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty, then rage. He shoved Jeb harder against the wall. "Where is it?" "You'll find out when the rest of the world does." The man's jaw clenched. Stupid old. Before he could finish, Jeb swung the wrench from his belt and caught him across the side of the head. The man stumbled, groaning. Jeb didn't wait. He bolted for the stairwell, his boots slipping on the wet floor, the bag thumping against his side. He made it halfway up before a gunshot cracked through the noise. Pain exploded through his shoulder. He fell forward, grabbing the rail. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he was falling into the same darkness he'd been running from his whole life. He forced himself up, one step, then another. The door at the top of the stairs burst open, rain and wind pouring in. He stumbled into the storm, clutching the bag to his chest. Thunder rolled across the sky like the voice of God. He crossed the parking lot, slipping on wet pavement, blood mixing with rain. He could hear sirens in the distance, maybe real, maybe imagined. His truck sat across the lot, a rusted Ford with one headlight out. He made it halfway there before another figure appeared in his path. "Mr. Walker?" The voice cut through the storm. Sarah Klein. She was soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide with horror as she ran toward him. "What happened? Get back!" he shouted. "They're here!" She reached him just as another shot rang out. The sound tore through the rain. Sarah dropped to the ground beside him, screaming his name. He clutched her arm, his breath ragged. "Take it," he whispered, pushing the maintenance bag toward her. "Everything's in there, files, names, you gotta finish it." No, we need to get you to a hospital." "Listen to me," he said, voice shaking but fierce. "They'll come for you too. Trust no one inside this courthouse. Not the cops, not the DA's office, no one." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw the weight he had carried, years of silence, of watching justice rot from the inside. "Why you?" she whispered. He smiled faintly, blood on his teeth. "Somebody's gotta clean the mess." Then his grip loosened. The rain fell harder. By the time the paramedics arrived, the lot was a chaos of flashing lights and soaked uniforms. Sarah sat motionless beside him, her coat wrapped around the bag, eyes fixed on the courthouse. Inside, she knew, were men who'd kill again to keep the truth buried. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated the janitor. As dawn began to break, the storm receded into a grey sky. Sarah stood, soaked, trembling, but resolute. She looked down at the man who had changed everything, a man the world would never know. Then she whispered, I'll finish what you started. She turned and walked toward the courthouse steps, each one heavier than the last. The building loomed before her, no longer just a monument of law, but a fortress of lies waiting to be torn apart. Somewhere deep inside its walls, secrets still slept, but not for long. The morning after the storm, Franklin County looked scrubbed raw, the streets slick with rainwater, the courthouse rising out of the mist like a monument that didn't deserve its own dignity. The world on the surface seemed calm again. But beneath that stillness was something heavier, something that hummed just under the skin of the city. Fear. The kind that follows when a truth too big to bury starts clawing its way to the surface. Sarah Klein hadn't slept. She sat in her car across the street from the courthouse, her eyes bloodshot, her clothes still damp from last night's rain. The file bag sat on the passenger seat beside her. Jeb's last act, his final defiance against the machinery that had swallowed so many like him. The bag looked ordinary, unremarkable, like it could hold nothing more than cleaning supplies or spare gloves, but inside it was dynamite. Not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that burns reputations, lives, institutions. Her fingers hesitated on the zipper. The weight of what was inside terrified her. She'd been a lawyer long enough to know that evidence like this wasn't just proof. It was a declaration of war. And war, especially against men like Hall and the judges who protected him, was never fought clean. When she finally opened it, the smell of paper and metal hit her like the ghost of Jeb's work. There were folders, dozens of them, some labeled with old case numbers, others handwritten in pencil. Clipped between them were printed emails, copies of deposition transcripts, even photos of evidence storage forms. The deeper she dug, the darker it got. There was a pattern. Case after case, handled by Hall or one of his close associates. Always the same signatures, the same clerical errors, the same missing exhibits. Men and women, mostly poor, mostly without names that mattered, swallowed up by the system. And woven through all of it, one recurring annotation written in Jeb's shaky handwriting. Misplaced evidence, check storage log, prob, destroyed. Her throat went dry. He had been tracking this for years. Watching, listening, keeping quiet until the silence started to choke him. She turned to the last folder. Inside, a single page torn from a legal pad. The words were faint, almost illegible. If something happens to me, trust only file 17. Don't let them clean it up. File 17. She scanned through the bag again until she found it. A manila folder thicker than the rest. Inside were photocopies of sealed memos, marked confidential. The names were heavier this time. A circuit court judge, a police captain, even a sitting congressman. And there, in the center, was the smoking gun. A memo from Hall's office discussing the disposal of key evidence items deemed non-essential for trial. Her stomach twisted. Disposal. That was the word they used for erasing people's lives. A car honked behind her, jolting her back into the world. She looked out the window. The courthouse loomed across the street, its columns still wet from the storm. Somewhere in there, people were drinking coffee, pretending nothing had happened. Somewhere in there, men who knew what Jeb had uncovered were already planning their next move. She zipped the bag shut and started the car. Her first stop was her firm, but she didn't make it inside. Two men in dark suits were already waiting near the entrance, their posture too relaxed, their smiles too knowing. Federal investigators didn't smile like that. These were something else, private, quiet, paid well. She kept driving, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that she was being watched. By noon, she was parked at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee burned your tongue and nobody asked names. She chose a booth by the window, her back to the wall, and spread the files out like a gambler laying down her cards. Every name on those pages was a thread, and she could feel them tightening around her. She opened her laptop, connected her portable drive, and started scanning everything. It would take hours to upload, but once it was on the cloud, it couldn't be buried again. She'd send it to the press, to the Bar Association, to anyone who would listen. Halfway through the upload, the doorbell jingled. She didn't look up at first. The sound of rain boots and the squeak of a jacket filled the quiet. Then a voice said softly, "Mind if I sit?" Sarah looked up. It was Detective Mike Hanlon, one of the few cops she still half trusted. Though trust was a fragile word these days. He looked tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many years of pretending justice still worked. "I heard about last night," he said. "You all right?" "Define all right." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "They found him. In the lot. I was there." Hanlon's eyes softened. "Then you know it wasn't random." "Yeah," she said. "And I think I know why." She slid one of the folders across the table. He flipped it open, scanning the pages. His jaw tightened. "Jesus, Klein, where'd you get this?" "From the man who just died cleaning up after them." Hanlon exhaled slowly. "You understand what this is, right? You're not just poking the bear. You're lighting its fur on fire." "I'm done being afraid," she said. He leaned closer. "Then at least don't be stupid. Whatever's in these files, you can't keep it all in one place. They'll come for it." "They already have." For a moment, they just sat there, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. Then Hanlon pulled out a notepad and scribbled something down. "There's someone I can trust. Retired journalist, used to cover corruption cases. Name's Avery Klein. She works out of a paper in DC. If anyone can blow this wide open, it's her. But you need to move now before they put you on a list." Sarah nodded. "What about you?" He gave a small shrug. "Me? I'll be fine. Nobody kills a cop with a pension. But you're the one holding the match." He stood, leaving some cash on the table. "Get out of town tonight. And Sarah," he paused, eyes meeting hers. "Whatever happens, don't come back here alone." She watched him leave, a sinking feeling tightening her chest. The upload finished with a soft chime. She copied the files onto a second drive and slipped it into her pocket. Then she packed everything, paid her bill, and stepped back into the rain. Her car engine started, but the windshield fogged almost instantly from her breath. She wiped it with her sleeve, trying to steady herself. Then she noticed it. The black sedan parked across the street, the one that hadn't been there before. Inside, two men sat motionless. One of them lifted a phone to his ear. Her stomach dropped. She threw the car into gear and pulled out fast. The sedan followed. The chase was silent at first, almost polite. Both cars moving through traffic, keeping distance but never losing sight. But as she hit the highway, they closed in. Rain lashed against the glass, wipers struggling to keep up. She floored it, the speedometer needle trembling past 80. The sedan's headlights flared in the rearview mirror. One of the men leaned out the window, arm raised, a glint of metal in his hand. She swerved hard onto an exit ramp, tires skidding. The car fishtailed, then straightened. Ahead, a tunnel loomed, its lights stretching into infinity. She raced through it, heart pounding, the sound of her own breathing louder than the engine. When she emerged on the other side, the sedan was gone. She didn't slow down. By the time she reached the state line, dawn was breaking again, a thin stripe of light cutting through the clouds. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She glanced at the bag beside her, Jeb's bag, and whispered, "We're not done yet." In the rearview mirror, the courthouse was gone, but she could still feel its weight, its rot. Somewhere in those walls, men were already rewriting reports, cleaning evidence, rewriting history. But this time, they'd missed a stain they couldn't scrub away. The road ahead was long, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. Not the system, not the law, maybe not even herself. But she had one truth now, clear and sharp. Jeb Walker had died believing that justice was worth dying for, and Sarah Klein wasn't going to let that be for nothing. As the first sunlight hit her windshield, she pressed harder on the gas, heading toward Washington, D.C., toward Avery Klein, toward whatever came next. The storm behind her was over, but the one she was driving into was just beginning. The highway stretched endlessly before her, a long grey ribbon winding through the mist of dawn. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, tapping faintly against the windshield, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Sarah Klein drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her mind a storm of everything that had happened. The trial, the files, the chase, and above all, the man whose quiet courage had changed her life. Jeb Walker. The name echoed in her head like a whisper she couldn't escape. Every mile between her and Franklin County seemed to pull her farther from the world she had once believed in. The law used to be her compass, her faith, a structure built to keep the chaos of human cruelty in check. But now, she saw what Jeb had seen all along, that the courthouse wasn't a temple of justice, but a stage, a place where truth was a costume, worn and discarded at will. The road signs blurred past. Washington, D.C., 48 miles. She pressed the gas pedal gently. The sky ahead was beginning to lighten, the pale gold of morning stretching through the thinning clouds. In her passenger seat, the file bag sat like a sleeping animal, silent but alive, full of teeth. She reached over, resting her hand on it as if to calm it, and whispered under her breath, "Almost there." The phone on the dashboard buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Klein," she said cautiously. A voice on the other end, female, husky, older. "You're driving a silver Toyota heading east." Sarah's grip on the wheel tightened. "Who is this?" "My name's Avery Klein. Detective Hanlon called me this morning, said you'd be coming." Sarah exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Yeah, I have something you'll want to see." "Then you'd better come straight to the Ledger office, 1327 Fairmont Avenue. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone on the way. You're not just holding files, Sarah. You're holding a loaded gun aimed at the government." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her reflection in the side window, hollow-eyed, hair wild, the face of someone who'd lost more than she could name. A part of her wanted to turn around, drive until all of this disappeared in the rearview mirror. But she could almost see Jeb's face in the glass, calm and lined with quiet conviction, the way he'd looked when he said, "Somebody's got to clean the mess." She kept driving. By the time she reached Washington, the city was awake. Traffic buzzed, horns blared, people hurried through crosswalks with coffees in hand. The rhythm of a world that had no idea it was about to change. Sarah parked 2 blocks from the Ledger office, scanning the street for anything unusual. The paranoia was muscle memory now. Every shadow, every parked car felt like a threat. She pulled her coat tighter around her and walked quickly, the bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, the newsroom was small and cluttered, a relic from an older age of journalism. Yellowing headlines on the walls, the faint hum of computers, the smell of old paper and burnt coffee. Behind a desk stacked with folders sat a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and eyes sharp as glass. "Avery Klein," she said, standing to shake Sarah's hand. "You look like hell." Sarah managed a weak smile. "That's probably accurate. Sit." Avery gestured toward a chair. "Hanlon told me this might be big. I've seen a lot of big in my day. Most of it turns out to be noise. Show me what you've got." Sarah placed the bag on the desk, unzipped it, and slid the folders toward her. Avery began to read, her expression hardening with each page. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the office clock. After several minutes, Avery looked up. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "You realize what this is?" Sarah nodded. "I do. It's everything they've buried, and the man who found it died trying to make sure I'd get it here." Avery sat back, tapping a pen against her lip. "These names, these dates. This isn't just Franklin County. This connects to 3 districts, maybe more. If this is real, it's real," Sarah interrupted softly. "I saw what they did to him. They don't kill a janitor for fiction. Avery studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we're going to do this the right way. You leave the files with me. I'll make copies, verify everything, and once it's airtight, we go public. Not just local, national. We burn them all at once. Sarah swallowed. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Avery said, standing, you disappear. I'm not running. Avery gave her a look that was part admiration, part pity. You're not running. You're surviving. That man of yours didn't die for a martyr's headline. He died so the truth could live long enough to matter. If they find out you're here, this all dies with you. Sarah didn't argue. She left the files on the desk and stepped back out into the grey afternoon. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, the city humming around her. She found a park bench nearby and sat staring at the passing cars. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of exhaustion drag her down. She thought of Jeb, of the way he had moved through the courthouse halls, invisible yet always present. She remembered the sound of his mop against tile, the quiet dignity in the way he had stood when he finally decided enough was enough. He had spent a lifetime cleaning other people's messes, never asking for thanks, never expecting redemption. And in the end, he had done what no lawyer, no judge, no politician had the courage to do. He had listened to his conscience. A light drizzle began again, cool drops peppering her face. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, letting the rain wash away the salt of her tears. Somewhere, she thought, if there was any justice at all, Jeb Walker had finally found peace. Her phone buzzed. It was Hanlon. You made it? He asked. Yeah, she's got everything. Good, he said, his voice softer than usual. Listen, Sarah, they found something this morning in Jeb's locker at the courthouse. Sarah's pulse quickened. What? A note for you. He hesitated, then read aloud. For Ms. Klein, you'll do fine. You're not like them. Keep the floors clean, even when they bleed. Jay. Sarah pressed a hand over her mouth. The rain blurred everything. The city, the sound of cars, her own breath. For a long time she couldn't speak. When she finally did, her voice broke. Thank you, Mike. Take care of yourself, Sarah. The call ended, leaving her alone with the city and the rain. She sat there until the drizzle turned to sunlight, the kind that made the wet pavement shimmer like glass. For a fleeting moment, the world looked clean again. A week later, the Ledger broke the story. The headline blazed across every screen and newspaper in the country. Corruption ring exposed. Prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement under investigation. The name Leonard Hall became synonymous with scandal. Dozens of cases were reopened, convictions overturned. The Department of Justice launched a full-scale probe. But in all the articles, buried somewhere between the legal jargon and the political outrage, there was one small line at the bottom of Avery Klein's exposé. The evidence leading to this investigation was uncovered by a courthouse janitor, Jeb Walker, whose quiet act of integrity set the truth free. Sarah clipped that article and framed it. It sat on her desk, beside a small, polished nameplate. Sarah Klein, defense attorney. But beneath the nameplate, taped to the wood where no one else could see it, was a faded sticky note, one she had carried since that morning in the courthouse. Basement storage, box 43, J. Some nights, when the office was quiet and the city hummed beyond her window, she would take out the note and stare at it. She'd imagined Jeb walking the courthouse halls again, pushing his cart through the glow of the exit signs, invisible but undefeated. She understood now what he had meant when he said, "Truth's a dangerous thing." It wasn't the danger of dying for it that haunted her. It was the danger of living with it, of seeing the world stripped bare and still choosing to believe it could be cleaned. Months passed. Investigations spread. The courthouse where Jeb had worked was gutted, repainted, rebuilt. But in the early morning hours, when the light hit the marble just right, Some said they could still see faint streaks across the floor, marks of an old mop, lines that no wax or polish could erase. Sarah visited his grave on a grey October morning. The grass was damp, the headstone simple. James Edward Walker, 1959 to 2024. He kept it clean. She knelt, setting a single white lily against the stone. "They're still trying to fix it, you know," she said softly. "The mess. You started something they can't stop anymore." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and warm, like an answer. She smiled faintly. "Rest easy, Jeb. You did your part." As she stood, the clouds broke just enough for a sliver of sunlight to fall across the grave. She turned toward the city in the distance, the skyline gleaming under the pale autumn light. The world was still messy, still cruel, still imperfect. But somewhere in the mess, there was still a place for people like Jeb Walker, quiet souls who chose to do right, even when nobody was watching. Sarah took one last look at the grave before walking away, her footsteps slow and steady through the wet grass. Behind her, the lily trembled in the breeze but did not fall.